And part of getting good at sports, especially reactive sports, is training our own internal algorithm to be able to predict outcomes as effectively as possible. Same thing with tennis, same thing with any of these sports where you're hitting a ball. You're actually creating an algorithm yourself to predict what is coming and how to locate or go to it. And that is what makes the best athletes in those domains. If they can accurately predict where something's going to be and to execute after they've gotten to the right positioning, which to me is this really cool intersection of like the same process that goes into a machine learning model, but we're training ourselves, and like the way we train ourselves can be very different if we use gradient descent, if we use some of these different things.
Back to the freeCodeCamp podcast. I'm Quincy Larson, teacher and founder of freeCodeCamp.org. Each week we're bringing you insight from developers, founders, and ambitious people getting into tech. This week we're joined by Ken Jee. He's a data scientist, sports analytics practitioner who works with US Team Golf and USA Basketball, and he's also the host of the excellent Ken's Nearest Neighbors podcast and the Exponential Athlete podcast. Ken, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Quincy. Always grateful to be able to have conversations with you and come on your show, and hopefully we'll have a fun little chat here.
Yeah, I'm excited to tease more insight out of you because you've been in the field for so long. You've interviewed like nearly 200 different data scientists over the years through Ken's Nearest Neighbors podcast. By the way, the name of that is riffing off the K Nearest Neighbors. You know, maybe you can explain how K Nearest Neighbors approach works.
Yeah, I mean, in most simple terms, you're looking at the K, which is equal to whatever number you set, and then you choose the that many of the nearest neighbors who are close by. So I have one guest, and I choose their or three guests, and whoever is closest to that person might be another interesting person to interview. But I can't take credit for that name. It was actually a poll that I did, or I opened it up to the community to name the podcast, and that was by far my favorite one. That was 100% the one that stuck.
Yeah. Well, you have such like an interesting career, because I know that of course you have like a formal academic background and master's degree and studied a ton of stats and things like that, but you also play a ton of golf, and you've played a ton in the past. So you've got that athletic background. And my understanding is you're pretty good. Like, I don't know where you stand in the grand scheme of, like, there are probably, tens of thousands of like very good golf players in the United States. But we're going to start by just going way back. And I want to go all the way back to where you grew up in Maryland, and kind of like, just so we don't have to constantly be revisiting your past, like, let's go ahead and establish the origin story of Ken Jee. So maybe you could just start by talking about like your early days and how you got interested in, sports.
Yeah, since I was a little kid, my life was almost ruled by sports. That's all I really wanted to do. If you go back to my earliest professional aspirations, it was to be a professional baseball player. Baseball was my first love. I played it all the way until my last year of high school, and that's when I switched to playing golf. I honestly was not very studious. I was a terrible student in middle school, high school, all the way through. All my effort and passion was directed at playing sports at the highest level. And I had some baseball opportunities to play in college, but I ended up injuring my shoulder, and I also didn't necessarily love the team nature of baseball, which I think is kind of funny. And baseball is a weird sport where you have individual statistics for a team game. And I was always very much interested in my own performance and trying to improve that. It's a little bit harder to isolate how a team performs to create a win than it is to figure out how an individual performs to create good outcomes there.
Yeah.
So I think teamwork and all these things are very important, especially in the professional world. But for myself growing up, it's hard to measure, we lose a game and I have a good game. Did I do something fundamentally wrong? Was I the coaches would criticize you for the team as a group when individual performances might have varied. And that was a little bit confusing to me. Golf was fascinating to me because it was completely quantitative. The only thing that mattered was the number that you posted on the scorecard. It didn't matter how you got there, how you took all the different shots. It matters. The coaches, any of these types of people, they would just look at the numbers on the card. And that objectivity was really interesting to me. Coming from baseball, objectively, I was undersized. I'm around 5'9" in high school, maybe 150 pounds. I was not exactly a physically gifted person in that sense. And that's something that, for example, college recruiters looked at. That's something that a lot of, there was a lot of onus on that. How big and strong you were is a major recruiting heuristic in high school athletes. And in golf, none of that mattered. All they care about is what number is on a scorecard at the end of the day. And to that, for me, that was a really beautiful thing. So I continued down this golf journey. I played golf in college. I then tried to play professionally afterwards. During that journey, I took my first economics course. I believe it was my third year of college. It was a little late in the game. And a light switch just went off for me. I realized that you could understand the world through math, through graphs, through trends. And I realized that I could apply that to my own golf game. Something that also happened in college is I switched majors, I think 6 or 7 times in my first 3 years. And for 3 of the majors that I switched into, I had to take a statistics class or a research methods class. So I ended up taking statistics 3 or 4 times, the same course. And who would have thought I got pretty good at understanding statistics? And I also realized that I could apply it to my golf game to help get better. So I really started to look at the standard deviation of my scoring on different hole types. I started to combine that with some economics concepts of increasing or diminishing marginal returns. So I'd look at what area of my game would have the highest return for the time that I spent on it. And I got a lot better very quickly. I thought I was getting good enough to be able to take it to the next level. Unfortunately, that did not work out, but it ended up being a very positive thing because I was able to longer term leverage the interest in math, statistics, and eventually coding into a career that I have now. So I tried to, after I took that economics course, honestly, my life kind of turned around. I realized that school could be applied to things that I loved, and I just really jumped in head first. I started to enjoy learning in a very different way. And I ended up transferring schools to Towson University. So I was in South Carolina before. I ended up going into Baltimore later. And that's when my golf career started to take shape. That's when I started getting really into more statistics, into continuing those economics principles, and into taking some business courses. After that, I did go down that professional golf route. And while I was there, I realized about 3 months in that this wasn't probably going to work. And I started studying for the GMAT. So my thought is if I go back to grad school, probably do something like management consulting, I'd be able to have a really broad opportunity set coming out because I was clueless about what I wanted to do at that point in my life. So I take the GMAT. I do well enough to get into a grad school at the University of Virginia. So I did their Master's in Commerce program. And in the interim, I had another 2 months before classes started. So I took an internship with a company called DraftKings. So at DraftKings, it's daily fantasy sports. I'd been playing it a lot. I was a super user of the product, and I was about breaking even, which is pretty good with the super rudimentary models that I was using. But I realized that there was something more that I was probably missing in terms of the analytical chops that I had learned from my basic business and statistics courses. So I went there, I saw them using SQL, I saw them using R and Python to analyze this data, and that was a completely new world to me. So I went back, I did my degree at the University of Virginia. It was a master's in global commerce with a focus on marketing and analytics.
Yeah.
And I learned some SQL. I learned some basic analytics skills. But honestly, that wasn't, I'd never written a line of code even after that point in my life. So we're getting into where I'm, I believe, 24, 25 years old, and I'd never written a line of code, which is totally fine. I mean, if I can do it, anyone else can probably create a career in this domain until late in that period. But going from there, I did end up going into management consulting. I worked in the Washington, D.C. area. I was in technology consulting, and I absolutely did not enjoy it at all. I was advising.
I have yet to meet somebody who enjoyed it. What's wrong with this field?
The funny thing is that I do consulting now, and I love it, right? So
yeah.
It's all about the domain and how we fit into it. And so I was a technology consultant. I was advising CIOs or VPs of software engineering about the software development lifecycle and project management and program management. And I had no clue what I was doing. I'd never written a line of code. How am I supposed to be telling the CIOs how to run their organization when I have no clue about how the bits and pieces work together? So I decided I'd had enough. I don't recommend this, but on the job, I was just sitting there and I was trying to learn how to code. I was using, I think, Code Academy at the time, but
yeah,
I will
this was
say
probably before freeCodeCamp.
Yeah. I will say now freeCodeCamp is a dramatically better resource. I wish I had it back then, but in between calls, in between things, I'm sitting there learning how to code. And at one point I just said, these skills are so important. Why wouldn't I just go ahead and learn them? Everything I wanted to do, I didn't really mention this, but outside of sports, I'd always been fascinated with entrepreneurship. I'd always been, and my parents have ingrained into me that you want to work for yourself. And I realized that everything I wanted to do, coding was important. If you want to build anything in the modern world, coding is one of the number one tools that you use to be able to create that infrastructure. So I said, why don't I just go back to school? If I go back, I can learn these coding skills. I can buy more time to figure out exactly what I want to do. Yeah, I'll go into a lot of debt, but I couldn't see a world where the combination of the consulting and interpersonal skills that I developed and the coding skills that I would develop would not be valuable in the job marketplace.
Right.
And so I did the arithmetic. Yeah.
So you just, again, you had confidence that like you were learning actionable, like useful things so that it was okay to take on debt. Like I just want to, like, that's one of the things we often talk about on the show, like the recurring villain of student debt, essentially in the freeCodeCamp, cinematic universe. Right. So I just want to caveat what you're saying with, like, you were going back, you were taking additional debt so you could like go even more technical. Right. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your flow there.
No.
But so you're going back after you've already completed the master's degree, and essentially you're going back again.
Yeah, to pay on more debt. So, and yeah, I mean, I had a good amount of outstanding debt from that previous degree, and I said, well, might as well just throw a couple more chips in. But obviously, clear return on that investment for me.
Yeah.
All of the opportunities that I was seeing from the consulting side is that, one, these engineers are making really good money, and they cannot get enough of them, at least at that point of time. I don't think it's too different now. I think that software engineering, data science, these skill sets are still in demand. The marketplace, though, is dramatically more difficult right now. I don't think that that's something that I'd want to like spread any false rumors about. But
yeah.
So from there, I actually started working at the company that I work at now. So one of my friends, I grew up playing golf with him, and he hatched this crazy idea to pitch the U.S. Ryder Cup team, or the PGA of America, who runs them, on a research program. So there's a really good business case. I think at the time the U.S. had lost 8 or 9 of the last 11 Ryder Cups, and we hadn't won overseas in something like 20 years. And on paper, the U.S. team was dramatically better than the European team, and for some reason we were just still losing in these competitions. And it had to be a operational, a management, a leadership type change, and analytics is a huge part of it. Analytics is also very kind of a sexier thing, and hiring a stats team or an analytics team is something that people are willing to pay money for.
Right,
so,
especially after like Moneyball popularized kind of the notion of having these kind of quantitative like metrics
Exactly.
applied to athletes, right?
Exactly. And so that's something that we eventually built out a program for and offered. I was able to do that while I was doing my master's degree in computer science. And to me, that was such a cool experience because I was learning these things. Sorry, I was learning these things, and then I was able to apply them directly on the project and the work cycle and the flow that we were doing. And so I was able to build out a lot of the infrastructure. I was allotted a lot of freedom to be able to experiment with these tools and these concepts. And that turned into more work, into future Ryder Cups, future President's Cups, into our basketball work, into some of these other things. And I wouldn't say it's been all history since. I actually took a hiatus and I worked at, I took an internship when I was in grad school. I took a hiatus and I worked at like a rapid growth company in Chicago for a little while. But the sports analytics work has always been my true passion. And admittedly, it probably comes from my own deficiencies. Not being able to make it in professional golf has been an unbelievable motivator for me to understand why I could not make it.
Yeah, man, there's so much to unpack there. First of all, how cool is it that you were so passionate about this as a kid? Like looking back, do you think kid Ken Jee would be pretty excited about the work you're doing today?
Yeah, I think so. He'd probably wonder why I didn't make it as well, and that's sort of the fun of it too. I think that after studying for my other podcast, Exponential Athlete, I realized a lot of the reasons why. But there's a very specific cocktail of the right process, the right ingredients, the right mentality, the right training approach, and natural ability that create a great athlete. And I realize how nuanced that is now. And I think the beauty of working in this field, the beauty of studying this, is you get to really understand and enjoy the small details and how important they are and how much of a difference they make between two people. A great round of golf and a pretty average round of golf can be separated by a single decision or a single shot. And understanding how to look at those in the big picture and over a large amount of data is a very different perspective than you have as an individual athlete, where you're living and breathing by every single movement or every single action that you take.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, like, I've heard that any field, when it gets like sufficiently competitive, right? Like, everybody has kind of like this baseline capability, and like a lot of it comes down to just like, I'm not sure if it's like luck. I'm not sure how much luck plays in like high level competitive things, but obviously luck across a large enough sample size gets kind of like averaged out, right? So what are the traits, in your humble opinion, like having studied this, just personally curious, that make like an amazing golf player, like a Tiger Woods type character? I just say him because everybody is familiar with him, versus like somebody who is just shy of being able to be professional.
Yeah, well, so let's start with luck. I think luck usually comes in the form of genetics. You look at, and it varies dramatically by sport. So, for example, I don't think it's a surprise, but in a sport like football or basketball or even swimming, genetics probably play a dramatically larger role than a sport like golf. Or even if we go all the way down to darts, there's probably less luck involved in those two sports. I mean, associated with genetics, as there is in a basketball or a football or a swimming. There is still some luck in genetics. So from some of the research that I've done, if you look into the field of motor control, there is a certain amount of randomness in everyone's given movements. So if you ask me to, for example, hold this little fidget toy and hold it perfectly still, that might be easier for me than for some other people.
Yeah,
So
probably a lot easier than
yeah.
for me. I'm like terribly clumsy.
Oh, exactly. And they call that it's like N, or like noise in the movement patterns we have.
Okay,
so
interesting.
that could be something that is essentially inherent in people, is their level of randomness in their movements. And you can imagine in a game like darts that's very fine motor control, someone could have just a natural ability of having a steadier hand or less randomness in their movements. That could be obviously something. I'm obviously more interested in the process and the conditioning and the training. So there's a bunch of different factors. It would probably be an entire dissertation to go through those. My other podcast, each series is almost 6-8 hours long. So, but at the highest level, there's the psychological perspective. So the belief that you can do something, and the ability to distance psychologically from the pressure or the pain or some of these other things, to look at things in perspective. A big part of that I'm seeing now is something called the alter ego effect, where people can take on a persona for a specific role that they're playing. So let's say, I know for a fact, we've talked about it, you're quite introverted, right? And if you're going to give a presentation in front of hundreds of people, that might not be something that you love. I don't know if it is, but
yeah.
but
I
generally
would probably have
for
to
introverted
turn on like, gregarious Quincy, fun-loving,
Yeah.
happy-go-lucky Quincy, as opposed to normal Quincy would be pretty reserved and like, keep to himself mostly.
And that's exactly what it is that we can step into these different personas, but we can also build these personas exactly how we want them to be. So you could step into Tony Robbins' persona, where you're mimicking his behavior, you're stepping into how he handles himself and his belief system. And that also actually creates a psychological distance where you're buffered from those normal feelings of anxiety or those types of things you might have. This guy, Todd Herman, who I've interviewed on the other podcast, talks a lot about that. There's also a process perspective that I think a lot of people don't realize. So being great at something, coding, sports, any of these types of things, it's a daily habit more so than it is a one-off thing that you do. So if you pursue excellence every single day and you do all the right things every day to be able to reach whatever goal that you've set, then all you have to do is follow this roadmap that you've set. And a big thing that the best coaches do are that they create this roadmap for their athletes. So the athletes, what they're responsible for is setting the goal and putting in the work to get to that goal. And then the role of a coach is to figure out all of the subsequent steps to be able to get to that goal. So if you think about it, if you have a good coach and they're good at estimating, they're doing all these things, greatness becomes this daily task rather than this incredible, crazy thing that you have to do over time, or this like crazy achievement that you have to do. You look at Michael Phelps, every day he's in the pool swimming. He has very specific goals that he's supposed to do. He has specific actions that he takes. And more often than not, if he takes all of the actions that he's supposed to take every day, over the long term, over the next 4-year cycle, he will hit the world records or he'll get the times that he wants. And inevitably that leads to winning gold medals. Another good thing is that all these athletes really focus on the controllables. So as I just mentioned with Michael Phelps, he only focuses on times that he wants to set. He does not focus on medals that he wants to win. There was all this talk about he won those 8 gold medals in Beijing. Yes, the gold medals are a result of him hitting the times that he wants. And those times are completely objective. There's something he has control over. What he cannot do is control the other swimmers if they just simply swim faster than he does, if they had a better day than he did. And so there's this whole pipeline of the psychological side, the goal setting side, the process side, and then you have a deep dive into the fitness and the even motor learning or these types of things where there's more effective ways to learn, more effective ways to practice, more effective ways to do these types of things. So again, there's this whole field of performance, sports performance. A big part of that also is the analytics that I do. So how do you evaluate all these things? You measure them. How do you figure out if you're getting better? You track it. How do you, evaluate if if there's things that need to be changed, is you look at the data and you figure out what is feasible or what needs to be adapted. So to me, there's this beautiful symphony of all these things fitting together. And it's fascinating that I get to go through and study this, because each of these individual disciplines are studied quite well, but the symphony of how they connect and how they create music, or this beautiful melody of unbelievable like outlier performance, is not something that I think a lot of people have dived into.
Yeah, this melody of unbelievable outlier performance. So you're getting to dive into that. You're getting to understand why Babe Ruth was so good at hitting home runs, even though they had nothing like the apparatus you have and the faculties you have in terms of being able to like analyze things, right? Like that was like nearly 100 years ago, and like back then he was just good at it, like people didn't necessarily understand why.
So here's where this all fits into analytics. So I believe I'm correct. I think it was Babe Ruth. He was actually blind, or like legally blind, in his left eye.
Interesting.
One of the greatest hitters of all time, one of the greatest quote-unquote athletes of all time. Baseball's a little different game. I won't lie about that. But baseball, a lot of these sports, they're not about raw athletic ability. Yes, you have to have some capability athletically, but baseball in particular is about predicting outcomes more than it is being able to react to stimuli. So when a pitch is coming out of someone's hand at 90 miles per hour, the amount of time that you have to react is too small for you to actually see the ball and hit the ball and make that cognitive process.
Yeah.
You have to essentially be starting the swing when the ball is coming out of the hand. So you have to be knowing within a very short period of time as the ball is leaving the hand, roughly where you're going to swing and if you're going to swing or not. And that is a predictive algorithm that people are running. It's essentially like a Bayesian process, right? That we have to make very quickly. And part of getting good at sports, especially reactive sports, is training our own internal algorithm to be able to predict outcomes as effectively as possible. Same thing with tennis, same thing with any of these sports where you're hitting a ball. You're actually creating an algorithm yourself to predict what is coming and how to locate or go to it. And that is what makes the best athletes in those domains. If they can accurately predict where something's going to be and to execute after they've gotten to the right positioning, which to me is this really cool intersection of like the same process that goes into a machine learning model, but we're training ourselves, and like the way we train ourselves can be very different. If we use gradient descent, if we use some of these different things, like it would be a metaphorical gradient descent, right?
Yeah.
But to me, there's so much interesting nuance there that a lot of the things in these fields are not too different. A lot of what makes things or models successful is not that different across domains.
That's so interesting. So like, I don't know as much about like actual physical sports, but like I enjoy watching videos about like competitive fighting games and things like that. And that's the same sort of thing. Human reaction speed is simply too slow to be able to, make some of these frame perfect inputs or predict what like an 8-frame punch is going to do and be able to react to it. So you instead have to develop heuristics. And general, like if I'm this far from the other player and they tend to do this type of move, then I need to counter it with this move or something like that, right? And I imagine it's very similar in like sports that are just like where essentially things are happening so fast that you just have to rely on instinct rather than be able to like cognitively process and think. Like I marvel at like the human anatomy and like the way that for example a lot of decision making is distributed down the brainstem, like all the way down your spine, like when you're like walking around and you like start to step on like a mouse or something, you'll like feel it under your foot and you'll like lift your foot before you like kill the mouse. You'll be like, whoa, or something like that, right? Like like and there's no way that that signal has time to go all the way up to your brain and all the way back down to your leg. It's actually like part of your like lower spine that's like making that decision. And in dinosaurs, you even have like almost a second brain like halfway down their backs for like large dinosaurs to help them make those kinds of limbic decisions very quickly. So yeah, sorry, I'm kind of like rambling here, but like it's very exciting to me. The notion that like so much of getting good at sports is, like you said, like training a machine learning algorithm the same way they taught like AlphaGo to play Go by just playing itself for hundreds of years, simulated, of course. So to some extent, just by playing a whole lot of baseball and swinging at a whole lot of balls, Babe Ruth was kind of training him on like how pitchers pitch and like kind of developing like an internal instinct for like the probability that the next pitch is going to be a fastball, for example. Am I kind of like going in the right direction in terms of like understanding what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. And so now we have ways that we can short circuit that or improve the effectiveness of this, is that they can strap you to a headset and you can use VR to pick up pitches and identify those types of things. One of the things with sports, though, is that you realize how important relevant practice is. So just picking up an object is not going to be the same as picking up a baseball. So very sport-specific practice or situation-specific practice is really relevant. And so there's a tight balance between practicing general skills and practicing specific skills. There's a lot less crossover than a lot of people generally think, and the crossover happens at sort of weird times. I don't have a great example off the top of my head.
Well, if you can dodge a wrench, can you dodge a ball?
That would probably be close enough. But
Okay.
you'd get more returns on practicing dodging balls than on dodging wrenches like they did in the movie.
Yeah, the movie, of course, we're talking about is the Vince Stiller Dodgeball, classic lowbrow humor movie that probably hasn't aged well. So let's dive more into the notion of data analytics and I guess how you got into the space, because I'm really interested what your early projects were, what kind of like what your progression was in terms of learning specific skills, because a lot of people in the audience are developers or they're university students and they're very interested in becoming data scientists or machine learning engineers, and that's something you've done. And I want to understand your journey. So let's rewind it just a little bit. You're like 25, 26 years old. You have learned all this math. You've learned all this domain expertise in the field of sports, and yet communicating with machines through programming. Like what did you learn in what sequence, and like what were some of the early, I guess, revelations and step changes in your ability?
Yeah, I wish I remembered it more clearly than I do, but at the early stages when I was in grad school for the first time, something that I was doing was just trying to build models in Excel. I was using linear regression. It wasn't very sophisticated. And I kept trying to understand, especially for the daily fantasy sports. It's like, how are people able to compare and evaluate the different athletes based on the predicted fantasy points? So essentially, it's daily fantasy. You have these fantasy football athletes. You choose a team, and based on how many points that they score in the real game or their actions on the real field, your team of whoever you've picked gets points. And the goal is to maximize points. And so I didn't understand maximization. I didn't understand budget allocation. And these are things that I was completely baffled by. So this is version 1. I'm working in Excel. I go to grad school. I learned some other different approaches using SPSS, some of these other tools. Still didn't. After grad school, I didn't have access to SPSS anymore, so I couldn't really.
So it's a pretty expensive statistical software tool.
I can't remember the expense. I remember. I don't think it was free. Right?
Yeah,
it's not
like
widely used in the
MATLAB and a
industry.
lot of these other kind of like more academic tools. You have to spend like hundreds of dollars for like a site license
for
or
the licenses and these types of things.
Yeah,
and so I couldn't necessarily use those tools to be able to build the models that I was using, and so I just essentially realized, hey, I have to pick up a whole new skill set. This coding thing seems like I could build whatever I want. It seems like it's flexible. It seems like I can do a lot of these different things. And so I go and I start grad school, and I start doing a lot of different projects related to this. So I learned about the knapsack algorithm. So the knapsack algorithm is exactly what you need to essentially get the most projected points for the lowest cost, or some fixed cost that you're trying to get. So if you have a knapsack, you're trying to figure out, okay, if you're robbing a bank, what are the highest price items that I can get to all fit in the bag without it overflowing? You wouldn't want to just put the heaviest, biggest stuff in, because you'd reduce the amount of overall highest profit or ceilings that you would get. So you want to maximize the value, and that's the algorithm that essentially solves this daily fantasy problem that I was having.
Interesting. So like in Dark Souls, trying to figure out the right armor without weighing yourself down and having the encumbered roll. You want to have like the fast roll.
Exactly. So a very useful algorithm for a lot of things, but that's something I picked up. And I was like, oh, I can use this for this specific problem. And it also took a lot of research. It was very difficult for me to implement. I could implement it in 20 seconds now with ChatGPT, which is great. But I still had to know of the algorithm, and I had to be able to adapt it for the use case, which is a really good learning process. Then I started working, all my projects were related to sports. So I did a project related to predicting basketball performance in games. I did a project related to UFC fights. So something that I was frustrated by was that in the UFC, there's a lot of decisions that are just really poorly judged by the referees. So there was quite a lot of fights where it went to decision, and based on all the objective measures, the person that won the fight should not have. So, significant strikes, time on the ground, control, all of these different things. And so I was like, can I build a robot judge that is better than these judges that are judging the fights? And I go in and I built that. And at the time, I was a little naive. I didn't really know how. Didn't know everything I do now. But what I had to train the models on was the judges' decisions. So you're essentially building circular logic into this.
Yeah.
But what I did determine, even by doing it in that way, is that the judging was virtually unpredictable with the metrics that were there, the data that was collected on the fights. And that suggests to me that there is massive bias, or that the judges are unbelievably bad, because you should still be able to see some sort of trend or be able to predict outcomes when matches go to a decision. So it wasn't necessarily a complete loss. It's that, I can't build a model that predicts things. But in some sense, I proved that these judges that they're using are really bad, and they should have some sort of overhaul associated with that. So really just following my interests, also solving problems that I saw in my own personal life, or a big thing was also data that I had readily available to me. And Kaggle was an incredible resource at that time.
Yeah, let's talk about Kaggle. Kaggle is like almost kind of like the eighth wonder of the world in terms of just having tons of data sets. Like I go there all the time. I'm going to be interviewing one of the key people at Kaggle on the FreeCodeCamp podcast soon. So look for that. But what is Kaggle?
So Kaggle is the best data repository and learning platform for data science. So they have a ton of competitions that you can compete in to optimize a model or tune a model to get the best prediction. But they also have a ton of just random data that people put up as part of a community project. What I like the most is that there's a lot of free code that people put up. So all these Kaggle experts or these advanced data scientists, they share their process of analyzing data with you. And you can go and you can learn and see how they go about not necessarily solving a problem, but approaching a data science problem.
Yeah, and
so
just a very naive question. That's mostly done in like Jupyter Notebook?
Correct.
Or Google Collaboratory, which is kind of like Jupyter Notebook in the browser?
Yeah, they have their built-in Google Colab environments that they use.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your flow, but I just want to make sure I understand. So the main way of analyzing and communicating data in 2024, would you say like Jupyter Notebook type user interfaces are the way that you break kind of like step by step, almost like the process of like a mathematical proof? It's like first we take this data and here's this code that runs against it, and then you're kind of like walking people through a narrative of how you're understanding those data. Is that accurate?
I think in those communities, yes, it's probably one of the best ways to be able to share data-related code. I think in production and implementation, I don't personally use notebooks very often.
What do you use?
I use like VS Code, and I just use a regular Python file rather than a Jupyter file, because you can run cells in a Python file in very much the same way. But when you execute code, if you're doing some sort of ETL or you do it in scripts.
Yeah.
And so
extract, transform, load, right?
Correct,
ETL. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I prefer to write my code in scripts rather than in executable cells, because if we're trying to scale, that generally scales dramatically better. If I'm trying to share my work and make it understandable to other people, which can be sometimes the role of a data scientist, Jupyter notebooks are okay. I probably would prefer dashboards, though, if I was going to share it with end users. So I think Jupyter notebooks are great for sharing work with other data scientists. I think sharing Jupyter notebooks with business people, for example, or people that don't code, is not a good use case. And for sharing code with other computers or with systems or with engineers, it's better to do it in just regular Python files or in GitHub repos or in whatever infrastructure that your company or these other people use, because it's designed to be there's just benefits and drawbacks of like the different ways that we package code.
Yeah, man, that's really helpful insight. We're getting the straight from Ken as to like how data scientists work, which I want to step back and just talk a little bit about the field of data science and how it's evolved over the past really decade or so, maybe decade and a half. Like the term data scientist is, my understanding, is relatively new. And there was even this joke, like, what do you call a statistician who lives in San Francisco? A data scientist, right? Like it was like kind of like almost like just like an obfuscation of like an old role. But the tools have progressed very dramatically. Obviously, the methodology has progressed dramatically. The statistics that underpins a lot of this is probably very old, like in some cases centuries old. But I want to get a feel for, like, let's just step back and explain it like I'm five. What is data science?
So I think if you look at what a data scientist does, they are simply problem solvers that used relatively advanced tools. So you're presented with a problem. Hey, I don't know why my sales are so low this month. So problem, I go in and I say, okay, well, what could be causing this? One of the best places to look is in whatever data that you have. So you go in, I start analyzing this. What do I use? I use probably SQL to pull the data. I'll use Python or R, or one of these languages, to interpret, organize, clean, and then analyze the data. And that's really, at the most basic level, what it is. We're creating a solution, and then we also have to tell the stakeholder what the problem is and communicate exactly why that's happening, and hopefully propose a fix. But at the very most basic level, that's what it is. And the role of data scientists hasn't necessarily changed. If you're thinking of an end-to-end data scientist, what's happened over time, though, is that, one, the tools have changed, and the specialization has changed. So if you look back, let's say like you're a private investigator, right? I think as a data scientist, in a very similar way, hey, we're trying to like solve this and understand what's wrong and then propose what you should do about it. That functions very different 60 years ago, or even like the chief of police and inspector. They were probably doing all of the research and going to the crime scenes and doing all this stuff themselves a long time ago. Now you have a whole team that does one specific part of that process. Maybe you have someone for blood analysis. Maybe you have someone who goes and interviews different people. Maybe you have someone that is organizing and filing all of the new things. So same thing's happening in the data domain is, rather than just one data scientist that does everything, we have like a data engineer that's curating and managing the data. We have a data analyst that's maybe focusing on dashboards and putting those in front of end users. We might have a machine learning engineer that's doing the model production and like making sure that these models are up to date and tuning them and monitoring them.
Yeah.
And so you have all of these different things that were maybe done less efficiently as a singular person, split into multiple roles over time. And then again, these tools are changing as well. Just, yes, we're still using largely the same programming languages, which is now predominantly Python, but we have new AI tools, we have new ML ops tools, we have better like data engineering tools. That's the core of what data scientists do has not changed. Those are the things that have shifted.
Yeah, awesome. So I'm very interested in just kind of your quick advice. We're going to delve so much deeper into this, but just for people who are listening, since we're establishing kind of like the baseline understanding of the field, if somebody, let's say they have very basic, okay, so I've heard that data science is really like a fusion of three different disciplines: mathematical knowledge, programming capability, and domain expertise. And would you agree with that assessment, or is that incomplete?
No, I think that that's pretty reasonable. I would say that in the world we live in now, in like a future AI world, all of those are probably like the requirements for each of those is reducing.
Yeah.
I would say the most important thing is understanding how to ask the right questions and developing that sort of meta problem solving skill. Because in a world now, you generally need two of those things to be very effective, whereas you used to need three of those things. So, for example, some of the people that win the sports Kaggle competitions, they know nothing about the sport in question. They're learning as they go, but that outside perspective can actually be very useful in helping them solve the problem because they're thinking about it not through the same lens as all the people who have been working in the domain before. In a world now where if you have really good mathematics knowledge, you can use a ChatGPT to complement or supplement some of the coding. Yeah. If you can code really well and you have great domain expertise, you can do enough research in the math to be able to, or you can experiment enough with the code that you can kind of iron out the need for some of that math knowledge that you used to need to have. So I would say that that's also something that is technically changing as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting. The notion that essentially you can shore up the weakest of those three dimensions using AI tools. And I want to talk a lot about AI tools, and we're probably going to talk at great length about those. But I do want to get back into, now that we've established that foundational, so just to reiterate what you just said. Somebody who's relatively weak at mathematics but knows a lot about the sport in question or the general field that is being analyzed, they can make up for the math, or they can make up for the programming capability by having a tool like GPT-4 create some scripts that accomplish specific things. Like, here's a mathematical formula. Can you implement this in Python code, right? Or people that don't have domain expertise. That's so fascinating that some of the best analysts of different sports don't even necessarily know how the sport works. It reminds me of, like does GPT even know what a Go board is, right? Or yeah. Like, does AlphaGo even know what a Go board is? Do they know what stones are? Do they know what the concept of two people sitting over a table, as has been played for, 4,000 or 5,000 years, setting the stones in the different grid points? No, it doesn't know anything. It just knows that like the expected value of going to this place is high, or it's just predicting the next move, right? Yeah. I mean, and humans who don't have that domain expertise are still able to perform very well, apparently, in these Kaggle competitions. So, I mean, can you give me an extreme example? Do you have any off the top of your head of like somebody who did really well at a competition without necessarily knowing anything about it? I will tell you a quick, very fascinating real world example of this. So there is a gentleman I think he's from he's somewhere in Europe. Sorry.
Is this the Scrabble example?
Scrabble. Yes. The guy is an English speaker. He does not speak French, but he's like a Scrabble champion. He decided he wanted to go to France and beat the French at their own, at Scrabble. But he didn't want to bother learning French. So what he did was he instead memorized the French Scrabble dictionary, which is so absurd for a neurotypical person like me. I struggle to, I've been studying Chinese for 20 years, and I struggle sometimes to even remember how a specific character looks that I've looked at like 20 times. And yet this guy is remembering the exact sequence of letters in these extremely long, weirdly pronounced French words. But he probably doesn't know how to pronounce them either. So that's not a difficulty. He just has to remember the sequence of, Roman characters so he can put those onto the Scrabble table. But he did it, right? Like, do you know the story behind that?
I believe he won the French championship. Possibly multiple times. But yeah, I mean that's where he has domain knowledge in Scrabble and probably has like a framework in place there, but he realized that can scale to other languages. Maybe he saw opportunities for words that French people wouldn't necessarily do, right? If you're a native English speaker, even if you play Scrabble, certain words are going to be more commonly thought of in a Scrabble game that you play because they're more prevalent in our vocabulary. He might be going there and he has no distribution of like recently used words or popular words or anything like that. It's like a uniform opportunity to explore all these different options that could have actually helped him because he didn't have these internal biases with French words that he might with English words. So to me, that's like a pretty fascinating thing. And that's the whole idea. There's a great book by David Epstein called Range, and he talks about how either analogous thinking, so pulling in ideas from different domains into your current domain can be a really powerful thing, or coming at things from an outsider's perspective can help you identify these built-in biases that people and organizations have. And to me, that's something that has been a very big change in my perspective on things, is that yes, domain knowledge absolutely very useful, but it's also important to have outsider knowledge or have a different view or a different perspective. And if we're thinking about the job market or any of these types of things, that's not something that a lot of people relish, or in your own personal life, you don't really see it as an important or valuable thing. But employers or people that are hiring for roles, they might find a unique perspective to be very valuable because it is inherently different than what everyone else is doing. And to me, that's something that is frequently overlooked. Again, I'm not going to say domain knowledge is not important, but I would argue the ability to at least step outside of the domain and pull in things from other places, that's as important, if not more important, because that's where innovation happens.
Yeah. Well, what are some ways you personally, like, do you just try to be like a voracious reader of like lots of different topics or something? Like, do you find in your day-to-day work analyzing sports performance and things like that, that some analogous topic or some completely different topic, or you just heard some random story like 10 years ago and you're like, wait a second, this reminds, like, that kind of pattern recognition that the human brain is so good at? Like, do you do anything to actively just shove more random stuff into your brain so that you can potentially have this big associative web to draw from?
Oh yeah, 100%. So the biggest thing for me is, well, there's three things that I do that I think are really effective for that. So the first is reading a ton. I probably read about 3 books a week now, which is a little aggressive, but for the podcast, the Exponential Athlete podcast that I do, I usually have to read 5 to 10 books for each series that I do on the athletes. So it's pretty involved, but I'd want to do it anyway. It's super interesting to me. I'm reading a lot more biography than I used to. To me, learning from individual stories, I mean, it makes sense. I do the Ken Jee Neighbors podcast where I do this biopic of interesting people in the data space. But to me, I start to make these relationships between what other people have done rather than necessarily the large concepts that you get in a business book or a more structured book. I've found that to be very useful. So I read a ton. I try to read a diverse array of things. But to be honest, I mostly read nonfiction. Every now and then I'll dabble into some fiction. I read about half of the Red Rising series so far, which I really enjoy. I highly recommend those to anyone. The other thing I do is I listen to podcasts. I really absolutely wear out the Founders podcast. I think that founders, innovators, entrepreneurs are people who are doing things fundamentally differently. And it's in the way that people approach things differently where you find innovation a spark. 90% of it might not work for you or probably won't work for you, but there will be 10%, a 5% that is different than what you're reading about other people doing that might resonate with you. And again, I think life is about a series of, it's sort of like venture capital, right? Where you're trying a lot of different things and eventually some of these things hit and they really work for you. And that's what you have to continue to index on. And the way that we find those little things that will hit is in a lot of research, a lot of study, and yeah, I mean, completely. I cannot say enough good things about the Founders Podcast.
Yeah, I've listened to it too. Yeah. I also want to chime in and say, like, listen to the Anna Wintour. I think the Vogue lady.
She's great.
Excellent episode. I'll link to that episode, and also the James Cameron episode is really fascinating too.
James
Cameron, the movie director. Yeah, so it's mostly like people who found companies, like especially like robber baron type eras and stuff. But there's also like lots of kind of contemporary figures. I think there's probably an episode about Oprah Winfrey, for example. So sorry, I didn't mean to derail you, but I just wanted to chime in, and I'll link to that Anna Wintour episode so people can check it out.
Also, link to the James Dyson one. That's one of my favorite ones, where he has this thing of essentially being different for the sake of it, rather than necessarily like different with a functionality. That's something I've tried to integrate into my life, is that novelty is something that we crave, and the only way that we're able to create truly innovative things is to build like randomness or difference or contrarianism into what we're doing. He might take a little too far at times, but Dyson's been a pretty successful company for making vacuum cleaners and hair dryers. So it's interesting to think about as well.
Yeah. And I'll just say, I just want to share a quote. George Bernard Shaw said, the reasonable man, and by the way, this is man, today it would be the reasonable person. The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man.
Exactly
Yeah,
how I would describe it.
If you just keep doing things like the way everybody's always done them, you're not going to get any innovation, right? By definition, innovation is throwing new things at the wall. So, yeah, cool. Sorry to interrupt your flow again.
No, you're fine.
I love sharing. Like that quote has always been very inspiring to me, and it's reminded me that like it's fine to be unconventional and to take different approaches. And like all those people that went to school with you that did everything perfectly and like had this very clear linear progression in their career and everything, and like they probably have a great like lifestyle and maybe they've got a house and they've got kids and all that stuff, but if you choose like a completely different path, there's a lot more risk, but you could end up doing something completely different, like being able to work, kind of your dream job doing data analysis. Your dream job would probably be to be a pro golfer, it sounds like, but
I would prefer this much more. The travel lifestyle of these professional golfers, as I've gotten to work with more of them, it's not something I would enjoy. You're on the road 40 weeks of the year. It's hard to have a family. It's hard to have consistency. I very much like what I do now. I think it is, between the podcasting and the analytics, it's perfect for me.
And this isn't a job that just like existed when you were a kid. This wasn't something you could like necessarily aspire to be, right? This is something you had to kind of gradually like kind of pathfind your way into over time, right?
100%. Well, to go back really quickly to that quote you said, on my board here, I literally I have it written down. It's the do things others won't, so you can accomplish what they can't. So if you do all the same things as other people, I think it's unreasonable to expect that you'll accomplish different things than they will. And so by doing different things every day or experimenting, I think you get to a different place, just overall and what your experience can be. And so that's something that drives me every single day. And it's very much in the same vein of doing the unreasonable things. Yeah. The last thing that I do to consolidate all this information is I try to go on a lot of walks, and I meditate every day. Usually in the morning and then at night before I go to bed. It just helps me to have that time where my brain can do the work for me. And that's usually when I have the best insight. It's a little disruptive because you're sitting there and you're trying to not think about anything. And all the great ideas and all the connections are being made and they pop into your head. So you just write them down and then you move on. But to me, that's, there's two parts where you have to accumulate knowledge and information, and then you have to let the subconscious brain take over and digest it. I think that when people are learning in general, that's a step that everyone forgets. I know that when I was learning how to code, when I was learning through all of my school years, I would be so frustrated that I couldn't get something. And then if I went for a walk or I took some time off, for some reason, it just sort of figured itself out in my head. And I think that that's an integral part of learning that is almost glazed over in every single educational institution that I've ever been a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I'm not sure if there are parallels to like how we train machines, but like I know myself, like precisely what you were saying earlier, like every single day I play bass for like, half an hour or so. Every single day I study Chinese for like half an hour, and it's just part of my routine. And I know, just like Michael Phelps, he's trying to like target this time, and he has confidence that if he is consistent in his, I guess, adherence to his regiment, to the game plan he's laid out for himself, the roadmap, that he will get there. He has that kind of self-belief that he is getting better, even if he has his actual progress feels like it's going like this. If you just measure like, oh, today I'm swimming slightly slower than I was yesterday, but it's kind of like a sine wave that's going up and to the right? And so many things in life are like that. And I believe that that's how it is with learning. Like, you feel like you hit a plateau and you're like, oh man, but it could be that it's just like an instantaneous kind of like feeling of that. And in fact, from an absolute standpoint, you're higher than you've ever been in terms of your ability to perform. It could be that you're just having an off day. Maybe you didn't sleep very well, or you're distracted by some sort of stressor in your life. But as long as you're, putting in the time and the energy to incrementally step that up, I feel like it's almost like a foregone conclusion that you will improve. Whether you hit your goal depends on how audacious your goal was, but you will improve. And I don't believe that there may be some things where there is like a ceiling, like a performance ceiling, but I haven't discovered that in any of my own personal endeavors. Like, I feel like everything I practice at, I get better at. And if you were to go and look at my old podcasts, and probably if you were to go and look at Ken Jee's old podcasts, he'd be less effective and erudite, and he'd probably than he is today, right? And like, that's certainly how I feel about myself, to the extent that I don't even edit my podcast. I'm like, it's like the equivalent of like crossing between the two buildings on a tight wire without a net. Like, I genuinely feel like that forces me to perform, and it forces me to be interesting, and it forces me to not interrupt my guests too much, for example, or go on too many tangents. So getting back to that, what you were saying about accumulating knowledge, then processing it, meditating in the morning and in the evening, and so it's almost kind of like you're training, you're ingesting and ingress. I'm not sure what the actual term is in data science, but like you're piling in all the knowledge, and then now you're able to like actually have like some output from that, and that output is just random insights that occur to you when you're meditating.
Yeah, pretty much. I would say some of the best insights that I've had about my career and my life and those types of things come in that process, and also related to my work or some of these other things. It's crazy to conceptualize that like the best things aren't necessarily things that I have logically come to, but I think that this is the process that humans have used for thousands of years. I mean, you look at some of the greatest inventors ever. You look at Einstein, you look at Edison, you look at some of these types of people. This was a part of their routine. I think it was Edison. He would hold like a ball in his hand, and he'd like essentially try to almost fall asleep in his chair, or he'd get in this like dreamlike like zone. Mm-hmm. And if he dropped the ball, he fell asleep. But if he could hold the ball there, he would be in this like correct zone for him to be inspired and to invent and to create incredible things. I wouldn't quote that's Edison, but it's some great inventor. So
yeah, that's an interesting process. I mean, you have to throw stuff at the wall and see what works. You have to try different things. Like I also am a lover of walking, and I would say like even though I go to the gym, 2 or 3 times a week and just do like cables and stuff, some free weights. Like the main thing that I do for physical activity is I'll just throw on my headphones and I'll throw on these 1 hour long podcasts like this one that you're listening to right now, like Ken's Nearest Neighbors, and I just kind of like ingest. It's my information diet. It's somebody teaching me about the world, teaching me about like I love stuff you should know. Is like,
oh, I haven't checked that one out.
Yeah, so that's like a great one where these two guys just like do a bunch of research about a topic and they talk about it, and that could be something as simple as like how is barbecue made or something like that. Like completely just almost like you would throw a dart at a board and you just hit some topic. All right, let's do a whole bunch of research on that. Like I think they had one about like Zamboni machines. Like that's how weird.
Interesting.
But like I know quite a bit about Zamboni machines from having listened to that I didn't know
I'll
before, and I never
down.
even knew I wanted to listen to that. Yeah. So that's cool that you're like really into walking as well, and like Steve Jobs, famous divergent thinker, loved to go on walks. And he would even like whenever he wanted to have a meeting with somebody, he would grab them and he's like, "Let's go on a walk and walk and talk." It increases your heart rate. That's why I like record these standing up, because I like to have like a higher heart rate, a higher energy level, and I think that does translate into some like slightly better, brain performance when I'm asking questions and stuff. But like you definitely think when you're walking. I find that when I'm running, like I'm too tired to like really think as well. So walking seems to be like the Goldilocks zone, like the perfect kind of happy medium between like no physical exertion, like relaxing and meditating, like you said earlier, and some degree of physical exertion, and like over exerting yourself to where you don't have the capacity to think, right? Well, where do you stand? Like, why do you like walking so much?
So there's really good science around being in nature, particularly walking through parks or green areas, around essentially one, sense of awe. So sense of awe is very good for creating psychological distance. Nature is restorative. So if please don't quote me on the actual science here. I can try to find the research for you. But if I recall, is basically if you go for a 20-minute walk without your phone versus with your phone, there's like unbelievable differences in your brain. Just like going for a walk in nature versus not going for a walk in nature. There was a very good study about, I think it was a housing project in Chicago. And I believe half of the housing project had green views and the other half had city views. And they went through and essentially studied these were randomly assigned, and they studied the psychological profiles of the people in green versus city views. And I believe they found like dramatically less instances of anxiety, a lot more motivation, a lot more energy, ability to focus. There's just really good. I mean, going for a walk in nature is just in no way bad for you.
Yeah.
It has a ton of positive effects, and it has that very similar meditative effect. Being able to, I think there's also something around like not seeing all these crazy geometric shapes that we see when we're in a city. So everything is very square, but very few things in nature are necessarily perfectly round.
Yeah.
There are like these weird amorphous shapes that make our brain have to do different things. And I think that there's something inherently beneficial, even if I can't necessarily recall the research or remember exactly what it is. But basically all the science says go for walks. All the science says meditate, take time, do these types of things, and exercise. And they've done very well for me in terms of my ability to understand the world around me, and my sense of self, and my sense of innovation and understanding as well.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about geography. So my understanding is, did you used to live in Hawaii?
Yeah, so I was in Chicago for grad school, and then COVID hit, and I decided that it was not super great to be trapped inside in the freezing cold just by myself. So I said, you know what, I'm going to go somewhere warm. My dad, grew up in Hawaii. I have a ton of family there, and my parents have a retirement home that they had purchased, and so they weren't living there. I said I'd be a good son. I'd look after the place, and I went out there and I stayed there for about a year, and then I moved into my own place. But yeah, I was out there, and then I very recently moved to Austin, Texas.
Yeah, awesome. So we're in the same time zone. I'm in Plano, Texas, which is maybe like 3 hours, 3.5 hour drive.
You gotta come visit.
I will, absolutely. Like, I didn't realize you were in Austin until like recently when you mentioned it in one of your podcasts. So yeah, let's like, obviously Hawaii, famed for its natural beauty. It's like the most remote island chain in the world, and it has like such lush, kind of like probably like very distinct wildlife and stuff. So did you spend, if somebody's going to Hawaii and they want to like really get like the best out of Hawaii in terms of like natural beauty and things like that, what are some things that you would recommend that they do while they're there?
Probably go to Big Island. Volcanoes National Park is awesome. You can see the active volcano. There's a beautiful hike in there. There's great hikes on all the islands. Admittedly, I didn't capitalize on it as much as I should have. I actually do not enjoy the beach at all. I think sand is like the worst thing ever created. I don't have a problem with the water. Just getting to the water on an island, you have to pass through the sand, and that's a difficult thing for me. But yeah,
I think you're the first person I've ever heard say they distinctly don't like sand. I mean, yeah, it gets in your shoes and it sticks to you. And there's sometimes like I'll be walking like here in Texas when you walk on the beach, there are these little crabs that have like little holes. Have you seen these? These little holes they breathe through, and like sometimes if you actually step on like one of their holes that they're in, they'll reach up and they'll claw your feet. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
And that permanently like traumatized me. Like I don't want to walk on the beach anymore in Texas because the crabs will like grab your feet.
Yeah, they're after you.
Yeah, wild. That's an interesting. So you like the water, but you don't like the sand that you have to get. Did you ever just like get a really good running start?
I'll get on a boat. I don't mind some of the other ways to get into the water, but and I'm not completely averse to sand. If I have mentally prepared enough, I'll go to a beach.
What is it about the sand?
I just the feeling, and then it gets in your car, and then it gets in your bed somehow, and then it's everywhere, and you can't get rid of it, and it's just. It's just a curse that follows you forever.
Yeah, it's like if you have a birthday party and somebody brings glitter.
Yeah, exactly. The exact same phenomenon for me with sand. But I think if we're thinking about I actually have been outdoors a lot more in Texas. So in Hawaii, because of the like the living conditions, it's an island, so there's space is so much more limited. You have to, drive, or it takes some time to get to the natural beauty and these types of things. I found moving into Texas, there's a lot more space. There's a lot more like intermixed greenery in the city areas and in the kind of suburb areas, and it's been really good for me on that front.
Yeah.
I obviously will still visit Hawaii quite a bit. I think I'm going to go back in June, but I've really, really enjoyed moving.
Yeah, I mean Texas does. I just want to acknowledge Texas is not a perfect place. There are a lot of problems here, but one of the things that they've done a really good job of is have lots of parks everywhere, and they do invest a lot in public spaces that you can go and walk around. We've got some near my house. During the pandemic, I took my kids to tons of playgrounds and just let them. They got extremely good at doing monkey bars and hanging for seemingly superhuman lengths of time with their tiny body weights and stuff. Texas is a really great place if you just want to go hiking. Or we went to San Antonio. We did these caves. If you get a chance to go to San Antonio, there's this
it's
cave
an hour
system.
and a half away, so I might as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also this cool ropes course thing with zip lines and stuff. Awesome. If you're curious, I'll try to find the name of the place. I'll shoot it. I'll put it in the show notes. Okay, cool.
So one thing I want to say is that if I look at growing up, something I loved about golf is that you're out in nature. I mean, these golf courses maybe are artificially green and have wasted a lot of water and these types of things. But from the human perception perspective, it's quiet, it's relaxed. I mean, maybe not relaxing if you're playing competitively, but if you're walking probably around 7 miles when you're out there for around 3.5 to 4.5, 5 hours. And so that is unbelievably refreshing to me. And that's one of the best ways that I was personally getting out in nature and having that time to think. So normal round of golf, you really don't spend more than about 10 minutes actually hitting the golf ball. Most of the time is spent going in between shots and thinking about what you're going to do. And so you have a lot of time to be able to smell the roses and enjoy yourself if you don't take it too seriously.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I want to get back to data science, but like welcome to Texas, man. It's so great to have another data science heavy who has moved here to live among us Texans. I want to talk more practically just for people that are listening who want to get into the field and understand what's going on in the field because it's changing and evolving very quickly. What are some of the biggest misconceptions you see people coming into data science with?
Misconceptions coming into data science.
Like, let's say somebody is they're like a statistics major, or let's say they're somebody who used to be working in retail and they learned to code and they've been working as a software developer for like a year or two and they're interested in taking their career into a data science direction.
So I think let's even back up. So someone that's coming out of college or high school that wants to be a data scientist, something I really struggle with, and one of the reasons I've switched more to podcasting content than more traditional data science content on my main YouTube channel, is that for some reason people think that data science, landing a data science role is like this unbelievable holy grail, this perfect position where you make a ton of money and you have this great life and all these types of things. And while data science work can be fun and rewarding, it isn't the end, right? You don't just get a job and your life is over and perfect. You have to continue to work. You have to do the work on the job. You have to manage office politics. You have to work in the specific domain and work on projects you might not enjoy or you might not be super comfortable with. There's drawbacks to every single opportunity that you have in life. I think data science can be an incredible career and a great stepping stone. You can learn a lot, you can make good money, but a lot of people, especially college students, they think that everything is going to be solved when they land a job at whatever company that they want to do. And that simply isn't the case. I think that you have to think a little bit more long-term to be able to have like a happier life, because if you don't, you're going to land this job and then there's this what's next thing that happens. And that happened to me, is that, oh my God, I landed this job. I thought I'd be so happy. And then the job isn't necessarily what I thought it was. Why do I have motivation to continue to work? I already achieved the thing that I wanted. And so thinking about things from a larger perspective of, hey, what would I like to do with my life, not just with my job or what would I like to do this year, that can help you figure out where to go with that data science job and after that data science job. And, it isn't specifically related to the domain, but it is related to the career. And that is one of the biggest problems that I see, is there's a ton of attrition, and probably to the fault of myself for putting out a ton of content around why data science is a good field to work in. I still believe it is, but inherently different roles are different people are different. And, data science might not be for everyone, right? There's some aspects of the coding or the problem solving or the autonomy that you're awarded in the job that don't necessarily resonate with everyone. But there's definitely roles that those people would be perfectly happy in, just maybe not data science, or maybe not software engineering, or maybe not product management. There's these different, what I should say, maybe to sum this all up, is introspection before action, especially in your career, is probably pretty important.
Excellent. And I think that is resonant, because I meet so many people that like went to law school, for example, and found out after going very into debt and spending like, an extra 4 years and maybe extra years doing like clerking and other sort of associateships, that they didn't like doing it. And what do you do when you're in that circumstance? We've had lots of guests on the FreeCodeCamp podcast who've realized, in their mid-20s, sometimes in their mid-30s or 40s, that like they're not going where they want to go and they don't really like their work and they want to do something completely differently. So introspection before action, especially when it comes to careers. That's a great insight. And if somebody wanted to get into the field, based on, like, obviously you're very candid about the fact that you learned to code and you learned to do data science and all this stuff like more than 10 years ago, and you don't have that beginner's mindset perfectly preserved in like amber in your mind somewhere that you can just go tap in and like, okay, what was it like back in the day? You have probably vague memories that have been like, as you said, like glossed over by time, and you probably look with rose-colored glasses at some aspects of learning to code, and so you might have like a romantic perspective of it that I'm certainly guilty of, as opposed to like you may not remember all the time that you just like had some sort of like
I was banging
hardware,
my head on my keyboard when I forgot a semicolon.
Yeah.
So if people wanted to get into the field, which again I still think it is a great field to get into if it suits you and you're interested in it. The biggest thing now, I think, this is projects are a good idea anymore, and I could see the blood rushing out of your face, Quincy. No, I'm just kidding. But what I recommend now is actually building products. So the difference between a project and a product is that a project, you're building it just for yourself. You're trying to create some insight. In a product, you're building things for other people to use. And I think that that's a big shift in the data science world, a big shift in the overall engineering world, is that with the AI tools, with the advancements in technology, it's a lot easier to build things that other people can use than it used to be. You have things like Streamlit, you have things like Shiny for Python, you have all these different tools to make things useful to other people. And you also should be sharing your work. That's the best way to, one, get feedback, but also to get recognized by employers or whatever it might be. So just constantly building is more important than necessarily learning the fundamentals or the frameworks. If you can build something, you'll intuitively pick up how these things work at a base level. I'm not saying you shouldn't learn the fundamentals. I think that they're very important, but you understand what the fundamentals are a lot better if you actually have to construct something to begin with. And so I think that there's sort of this balanced approach where you learn some fundamentals, you build stuff. You learn some more fundamentals, you build stuff. And you sort of weevil wobble back and forth till you have really built some really cool stuff, and you're able to create opportunities for yourself in the job market.
Awesome. So that's like, just to encapsulate that advice, build products, not projects, because products have kind of like an outward focus on like an end user who's going to pick up what you built and use it for something. Like the difference between just having a GitHub repo where you've got a bunch of code and you do your data analysis and you look at like, all right, I'm done, I'm going to move on. No, instead go on Kaggle and build like, essentially like they're called projects on Kaggle, but essentially like have a narrative of like what you did and what sequence, so people can like look at it and learn from it, and maybe clean a data set and put it up there so other people can use it, and you can think of that as a product. freeCodeCamp's curriculum is very project oriented, but we make it a very clear point that like there's a difference between projects you're building to learn, kind of step by step, and then there's like open-ended certification projects that you have to build and get all the tests to pass to earn the certification. But then there's the actual personal projects, which you could view as products. Essentially, you should have like a big overarching problem you want to solve, whether that's like some sort of analytical engine for like understanding like baseball statistics that are published through some API or something, right? Like, so that you can have a website where people can go and see like at a glimpse, like a dashboard where like they can see the performance of, a player on their little league or something like that. I'm not sure if that's available, but like something that people, like, even if it's just a few people would actually use, that can really inform your development, and it can give you kind of a North Star. So you're not just thrashing like, maybe it'd be cool to add this. No, like people are asking me to add this, so I can add this. I definitely like that focus on creating an artifact that other people are going to actually be able to use. And then there's like that feedback loop of maintaining it and extending it. Not just based on, we talk about this all the time on the podcast, but not just following your own flights of fancy, but actually, getting actual real world feedback. Yeah,
I agree. And I should clarify, I think projects have absolutely a use case in the learning process. If you just write a simple line of code, you copy one line of code and you run it in whatever IDE you're using. That to me is a project,
Yeah.
right? You're experimenting, you're trying to do those things. That's an integral part of learning. But if we're talking about getting a job, we're talking about thinking about making that transition from learner to practitioner. I think the project to product paradigm shift is a really important one, because in industry, when are you ever writing code that someone else is not going to use or some other system is not going to use? And to me, that's a very important distinction. There's one thing to write code for ourselves to learn and to use, and there's another thing to write code that is essentially almost always going to interact with other people or other systems.
Right. Yeah. 100%. Do you have any cool war stories that you could share from just like mistakes you've made over the years doing data science?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think something with my work is that we work usually with professional athletes or coaches. And so when we're working with these groups, we have to remember that they come from very different backgrounds than we do. They generally are really intelligent. They work and they understand golf or their domain unbelievably well. But the idea that they will necessarily understand the analysis that we do, they'll necessarily understand a specific type of graph if we show it to them, that's not an assumption that we can safely make. They've indexed really heavily on being good at golf or being good at basketball or being good at whatever it is. They haven't indexed in the same way on being really good at statistics or interpreting graphs or any of these types of things. So
Right.
when we're approaching our clients and trying to explain our work, how do you explain a Monte Carlo simulation to a professional golfer? How do you explain k-means clustering or that this model came out of XYZ neural net that we were using? That is a very difficult challenge that we faced, is just the ability to explain in real terms or in golf terms some of these types of models and analysis that we're using. So it's hard to get buy-in if people don't understand what you're talking about. And so as much as it's a fun engineering problem, in our work, a lot of it is a communication opportunity as well, to be able to speak in the terms of whoever you're working with. So that's something that I've struggled with historically, and we're showing graphs, showing all these different simulations and the different, like the bootstrap standard deviation of the results. And maybe that's not the best approach. It's definitely what we've learned. But for anyone that's working in a specific domain, if you have these domain experts and you have some domain knowledge, it's probably better to explain things in their terms rather than your statistical terms. If they want to know the details of the analysis, great, but does it really benefit them for you to go through all of this painstaking detail around any of the relevant metrics that they might not understand? Like, what's the point? You're wasting both of your time. And so that has been a huge lesson for me, is know your audience and try to speak their language.
Can you think of any like specific instance? And you don't need to say the name of the athlete or anything like that, but like an instance where you learned something where maybe you presumed too much, or you just didn't have the ability to communicate in a way that resonated with them?
Yeah, I think something that I hadn't really thought of in a long time is that, like, percentiles, the idea of a percentile can be pretty complex, actually. So people think in terms of percentages. So they might think that, hey, like, if they're 90th percentile, that means there's a 90% chance of something happen. I could see where that would be a logical leap, but percentiles and percentages, they can mean very different things. They're not percentiles are not probabilities. And that could be something, if you're communicating, that could be, that could hang up on some people. And so we've had to clarify language like that specifically. I don't want to get too much in detail into that, but that is an area where you could see, hey, like, not having a statistics background, not having like that great a grasp of that concept would be really difficult. It's the same thing for like if we're talking in golf language, like what is an like I'm trying to think of what a corollary would be, but the like understanding angle of attack versus D-plane. Like people might be really confused about what those two things are. I don't even really conceptually understand what they are, but a golf instructor would be like, oh, that's so easy to explain these different things, but they look kind of the same on like a piece of paper to me. So it's understanding the domain, and it's a completely understandable differentiation to make as well in that case. It's just that we have to be better thinking about, okay, could this be misconstrued?
Yeah. Yeah. Like I guess a common software development corollary that a lot of people might encounter is maybe they're at a dinner party and they're like, oh, I'm a JavaScript developer. And the other person will be like, oh, I took a Java class in high school, not knowing that
JavaScript and Java.
Java is to JavaScript what car is to carpet,
yeah,
as they say, right? Like they're two different things, but it's like it's almost like people's existing understanding of how percentages work got in the way of them understanding the notion of like percentiles. So just little things that you can easily work around that if you just word things differently, but you have to know to work around that. Like there are like false cognates when you're learning a foreign language, for example. Like there are words that look just like English words, so you might be inclined to think that they're the same word, but they're actually totally different in that language. It's just a coincidence that they're the same word, right? So kind of like structuring your thinking and structuring your approach through a product to communicate things without overcomplicating it and without having to pull somebody aside and have like a whole sidebar about like, okay, let's explain how this works and this works and this works. Like, they just want to know at the end of the day what they can do to improve, right? I mean, maybe it's a lot more than that, but I presume that athletes, they want to be the best golfer they can be, and learning a whole bunch of stats, that time could probably be spent working on their swing or just practicing, right? Maybe there are some concepts. Are there any like statistical concepts that just like living your life that you wish more people were aware of? Like, are there like any, like, do you see people make mistakes with like probability time and time again? Like, but if they just took a moment to actually understand like some facet of of probability or statistics, they could like really do themselves a huge favor?
I'm sure there are some, but I can't think of one off the top of my head right now. Let me, I'll try to get back to you on that one.
Yeah, like correlation and causation, obviously that comes up all the time. The lay person might not understand the difference between two things being correlated and may think causality, right? Hence superstitions, right? Like,
well, something that I like is like an optimal stopping problem.
Optimal stopping problem.
Yeah, so essentially, if you're hiring or you're trying to find a partner or whatever it is, the math nets out that you should probably stop around 33% of the way through your search and choose the next candidate who is better than all of the previous candidates. That is, I don't remember exactly how the math works. There's this book called Algorithms to Live By. I think that's what it is, or it's How to Not Be Wrong, one of those two books. And effectively, that is the way to optimize and maximize getting the best candidate in a scenario like that. So a lot of people think that they have to go all the way through it, or like job hunting or hiring or any of these things are difficult problems. But to me, there's like actually a quantifiable way to get probabilistically the best candidate.
Interesting. So just to make sure, like all the job seekers out there are probably going to be really upset about this. But if this is true, like if you're a hiring manager and you get 500 applications, you should just look at 1/3 of 500, and you should basically stop there and just choose your best candidate because.
No, you choose the best candidate after that 1/3.
After that 1/3,
you throw away that 1/3, and then the next best candidate that's better than anyone in that 1/3 is the one that you would take.
Ah, interesting. Okay. Now I can see how it works. Okay.
I mean, in theory, that's not how the job market precisely works. In dating, it's probably more of a corollary, right?
Yeah.
Where
but you're getting the most return on your time because looking at the remaining 2/3 is going to take 3 times as long as you've already spent. But finding another person who's better than those might only be few more terms, a few more iterations, right?
Precisely.
Yeah, and that does sound really cold and weird when applied to like the labor market, or certainly applied toward trying
Towards
to
a
find
relationship.
like a life partner. But that's math, right? Math doesn't care about your feelings.
Yeah. I'm not saying that people should do this. I'm saying that it's a useful tool if you were like trying to perfectly optimize for time spent, but like that's not how any of these things work in practicality. That's how another thing I'll also say is that, in the real world where there's infinite variables, simple heuristics can be, statistics can actually be a heuristic rather than a like a factual thing, right? Because the statistics we use a lot of the time don't incorporate all of the data that is available in human interactions and dating and any of these types of things. So that's another thing that I've learned about statistics is like, yes, that they're relevant, but there's almost always things that we can't quantify. And so taking everything with a grain of salt is pretty important as well.
Yeah. I mean, like any complex system, you're going to have a model, and that model is an oversimplification of that complex system, right? So when you say the word heuristic, I just want to make sure everybody in the audience knows what this term heuristic means. It's basically like a mental shortcut, essentially, or like a rule of thumb, which does not mean what they say it means in Boondock Saints. It's not about like spousal abuse. The term has no association with that, so I will not use the term rule of thumb because it's just like a weird movie thing. Okay, so like a heuristic, like essentially a rule of thumb, kind of like a tool that you can use to save yourself a whole bunch of time and energy doing an exhaustive search. So you're saying that a lot of statistics applied is not like if you were to talk to like, I guess like somebody who was obsessed with getting the 100% accurate, like state-of-the-art response, you could save yourself a whole lot of that work and get a good enough answer, so to speak, by applying statistics as a heuristic.
Yeah, it's very often, let's think about it. A heuristic can be a statistic, right? So let's say we're trying to determine if someone can like bench press a certain amount. And maybe there'd be like an age heuristic that we'd use. And so technically that is a statistic as well, right? If we add additional attributes to it, the more like advanced we make the model, the less of a heuristic it is. Because the heuristics are based on the sort of like either gut feeling or the short gut, but still both of those are statistics. And I think a lot of people don't realize that, hey, whenever there is still a gap in information, it is technically a heuristic. The machine learning models we use, all of these types of things, in my opinion, are technically still largely heuristic models. They're just significantly more refined than just high-level heuristics.
Yeah.
And I don't think people realize that there is a scale that these things operate on. So like the highest level might be that age heuristic. It would be less of a heuristic the more refined we make it and the more specific it gets. But if it's not 100%, technically it is like a heuristic model, right?
Yeah, awesome. Could you like talk a little bit closer to your mic? Like the volume just dropped a little bit. Sorry about that. Okay, I didn't want to interrupt your flow. Okay, so one of the things that you said on your podcast, one of your recent podcast episodes, I listened to a bunch of them in preparation for this interview, that really jumped out at me as like being really interesting, is that there's a danger in taking other people's heuristics and applying them without understanding how they arrived at those heuristics. And it's often much better to just grapple with it yourself and create your own heuristic than it is to use somebody else's. So like, don't take somebody else's heuristic at face value and try to apply them to your own work. Why do you believe this?
So I think in the world we live in, it's becoming more and more of a mass customization world. And let's take a biology example, where if I take a certain supplement and someone else takes a certain supplement, we might have varying reactions to it. Someone, it might do really great things for them and make their gut really comfortable. But if I take it, it makes me feel really bad. And that could be for a whole host of reasons. It could be that, hey, I have different genetics. It could be that I have a whole completely different gut microbiome that impacts my sensitivity to supplements or all these different things. There are these individualized factors in all of our problems that that can lead to very different effects from the same inputs. So to me, maybe if it has helped a lot of people and say, oh, this helps 80% of people, it's worth experimenting with, but I should still validate the results on myself because my unique situation is different. I don't see this as being different for companies or different for athletes or whoever it is. There has to be that level of individual experimentation to make sure that things are a fit. You can't, again, take this on face value and assume it'll work. I see this with, for example, content all the time. So you go and you look at Mr. Beast, who is by far the most successful YouTuber of all time. He creates thumbnails that are very like emotional. They're very whiz bang. They're very clear, but me creating that type of thumbnail for educational content would not work because what the user is expecting to get does not match the content of the video. So, you know, if you look at the unique situation, if you have something that is more relevant to education, that thumbnail will be more likely to be clicked by the audience because it resonates with the message of the content as well as the content itself, and it'll lead to better outcomes. So if you were to say, oh, just make it how Mr. Beast does it, that isn't going to line up from a like conceptual or analytical perspective at a certain point in time. So I think that there is that, again, introspection that we have to do on ourselves or our business, but there's also that understanding of the matching and the small data associated with ourselves that we have to be evaluating as well.
Yeah, 100%. And I can talk anecdotally about that very thing because you and you know, your YouTube channel is quite big and you've had a lot of very popular educational videos. And it's very hard to get people to click on and actually watch something that's good for them, right? It's hard to get your kids to eat their vegetables, take their vitamins, when they could just be eating, you know, Cocoa Puffs or Pop-Tarts or whatever, right? But yeah, a lot of people ask me, like, Quincy, why don't you make the freeCodeCamp thumbnails pop? Why don't you make them more like Mr. Beast and have like the YouTuber face and like, you know, like all the arrows and circles and all those different tricks that people use. But like with YouTube, you actually don't want people who aren't going to like your video to click on your video. It penalizes you for if you have like a really high click-through rate but a really low watch time, that video is heading downward. Like it's not going to be recommended to very many people. It's much better to have like with education, have an extremely literal thumbnail, like the kind that Bo Carnes creates for YouTube, for freeCodeCamp's YouTube, where it's just like, you know, R programming in 10 hours or something like that, or 10-hour course or something like that. And it's just like the R logo. Like we found that works a lot better in terms of getting a video to like actually do well than trying to like jazz it up and Mr. Beast-ize it. Maybe we could talk a little bit about your career as a creator. I have a lot of other data science and AI questions. And do you still have time?
Yeah. I should, let me double check real quick, but I think we're...
Yeah, we blocked out 2 hours for this, but like...
Yeah, we're good.
I'm having so much fun talking to you. If it's cool, I just want to keep firing these away. It's not every day you get to sit down with Ken Jee. So,
I mean, it could be, Quincy. You just got to move a little closer.
Yeah, I got to get down there to Austin. We got to go get some food together, get some barbecue.
I'm down.
All right, so let's talk about creation. Like, so you've been doing this podcast for so long. You are incredibly prolific. You're incredibly consistent. And now you have a second podcast as well, which it sounds like, I haven't listened to it yet, but it sounds like it's a different format of you going really deep. What would you advise someone to do if they wanted to create educational content or science content? Like what are some of the things that you've learned on your own journey, and what, I guess, got you to upload your first video to YouTube to begin with?
So my first video was for a class project that I did. So when I was in grad school, we had to do a little presentation, and I had compared two different types of recurrent neural nets to predict crypto prices. And it took me 5 minutes to make a video, and it was an online course, so I just uploaded it, didn't think anything of it, shared the link. I didn't realize you could make unlisted videos or anything along those at that point in time, so I just made it public. And then I look back like 3-4 months later, and it had 1,000 views at the time. And to me, that was a ton of views. I was like, wow, people are interested in this. Like this is, I'll take note of that. And then a little bit later, I was landing my first kind of internship and role out of grad school. And I'd gone from management consulting into data science. And there was absolutely no roadmap for how I could do that. And so I'd gone through this process, and I was like, well, maybe I should build this roadmap so it could help other people going forward. I already have this YouTube channel that I had published this one video on. I might as well put that up there and see if there's any traction. And that did okay. And then I said, wow, I really like making these videos. I like educating. There was also a point in time where I did an interview where I had to just talk into a camera. And it was a prompted question, and I just recorded my answer, and it was unbelievable. I watched it back, and I was like, man, I don't even want this job anymore. And I realized that one of the best ways to help improve my communication skills was to record myself on video and watch it back. And so I said, why not? I'll do that. It'll be a good way I can spread information I thought was useful, and I can also improve my interpersonal skills in this way. And so it started like that, and it just continued to snowball. I realized I really liked making videos. I like storytelling. YouTube is very interesting because it is a data problem. So you get all of your metrics for the videos, you have the click-through rates, you have all these things, and there's all these different things that you can tweak. So to me, that was a really fun exercise as well. And then during the pandemic, there was a massive surge in an interest in remote jobs and data science and these types of domains. And the channel really ended up taking off more. And as part of that, I was trying to produce a lot of content. I was making 3 videos a week. And one of the types of videos is I was just interviewing people in the field. And I realized that I liked that even more than making normal videos. So a podcast to me, one, you get to meet another really interesting person. You get to sit down and have an in-depth hour-long conversation with them. And it's also easier content to make. You have to spend an hour, maybe 30 minutes before preparing and an hour talking. And you get this content that people are ready to consume already. And I said, wow, that actually makes a lot of sense. Why don't I index a little bit more towards that? One, because I enjoyed it arguably more than putting together a YouTube video. And it was also contra to the kind of snippet or short form sort of phase that we're going through. Yeah. I'm a believer that nuance is really important and going into detail is really important. And in the short form world we live in, we're making everything about these highlights. And if you live your life by highlights, you're not going to get very far because there's always, like the devil is in the details in almost everything. So I view podcasting, I view my new podcast as a way to go really deep into the details, which is where the true insight is found, in my opinion.
Yeah, 100%. And like with TikTok and with YouTube Shorts, and even with like, you know, some of these short form articles that you read, like, you know, pop science type magazines and stuff like that, like to some extent, you're just information grazing. You're just kind of like, oh, this is information, this is content with a lowercase c, right? And I love long form conversations like this. And I find them so valuable, and I listen to hours of this stuff every week. Like I listen to everything at double speed, so I probably listen to like 2 or 3 hours of podcast type conversation every single day. It's like a huge part of my information diet while I'm walking around and getting exercise, or while I'm, I'll take the kids to the park and they'll be on the monkey bars, and I'll just kind of walk laps around the playground area, right? And I find this incredibly useful because if you think about it practically, like what are the odds that I'm going to be able to have an in-depth conversation with somebody like Ken Jee regularly, right? Am I going to meet him at a dinner party? Is he actually going to focus on talking just to me for this long? Am I going to be able to, and then, so you're doing research before you even sit down and talk with these guests that you've had on. And as a result, you're like much better prepared than you would be even in some casual, like, oh, you're at some party and you walk into the kitchen to get, some hors d'oeuvres and there's like this person standing there and you start talking. Like the amount of depth you can get in a podcast conversation, especially when you're doing things like defining terms for a lay audience and things like that. Like it's an incredible learning tool. And I really wish podcasting was around when I was a kid. Because I think I would be so much smarter and more interesting than I am today if I'd grown up doing this. So yeah, I just want to emphasize that, like, if anybody's listening to this and they're thinking like, oh, there's already too many podcasts out in the world, who has time in the day? Like, I spend a huge amount of time. I listen to dozens of different podcasts, maybe hundreds of podcasts over the span of a year, and hundreds of different podcasts, like RSS feeds. It's amazing. Also, if you're watching this on YouTube, there are RSS feeds. You can just listen to Apple Podcasts. You can listen to Spotify. You don't have to use as much data. Definitely, I encourage you to subscribe to Ken's Nearest Neighbors and to the Exponential Athlete podcast as well. Super insightful. Like I'm very excited about listening to the Exponential Athlete myself, just because a lot of these things that I think maybe it'll help me up my fighting game skills, like understanding, like there might be some ancillary concepts that I can port over. So,
yeah, well, I love what you said. The way I view it is that you have, like first order and second order thinking. And I think you can have first order and second order conversations. And what I mean by that is first order is, or even third order conversations, or first order is you're talking about something that is not super nuanced. You're talking about the weather, you're talking about whatever it is. A second order is it's a deeper conversation where you have intimate knowledge, or you both have intimate knowledge of a specific domain, and that's where insight comes from, where you can go past the pleasantries, you can go past maybe some of the high level details and get into where topics or areas that are unique to each individual person. And then third order conversations build on those second order conversations, and you get to places there that maybe no one has been before. Maybe you're talking about a topic in a different way, or combining two different disciplines, or whatever it might be in this different way. And I think that the longer form content allows you to go into those areas and make those deeper insights and to piece things together that might not necessarily be naturally occurring. And again, that is where insight happens. And that's something I really love about this. Also, podcasts are a great opportunity to talk to unbelievably interesting people. You have the opportunity to have these conversations. If you have a podcast, you have a reason to connect with a bunch of interesting people if you have a podcast. That's a very different thing as well, as, I'm trying to grow my career. It'd be great if I could ask all these people who have been successful in this career, in this domain, oh, wait, if I have a podcast, I have an excuse to interview them for their time. Unless they're professional athletes, unless they're super high profile, they'll probably give you the time of day too, because it benefits them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a great way to bridge into AI, because AI is not about creating anything truly novel, right? It's all about like taking stuff that's been fed into it and trying to synthesize something that looks novel, but it really is, but you've talked a lot about your experiments with LLMs to create like social media posts, and how you ultimately abandoned a lot of that because it's just derivative. And it felt like you were just tweeting kind of like a copy of, what GPT-4 thinks is like a good tweet. And that you think that podcasts are like almost kind of like and it's all novel. And like this particular sequence of words that I'm saying right now is statistically never been said before, right? Like even if you look at the past 20 words I've said, probably, right? Like that sequence of words has probably never been said before. So maybe you could talk about like how we can still create interesting novel content even when we have this kind of like, token predictor type tools that are incredibly powerful and useful, but at the same time are not really generating anything novel.
Yeah, well, it's going to sound like I'm contradicting myself, but I promise I'm not. So I don't think in the world now, if we really view it, there isn't really any new ideas necessarily. Like the core of ideas stays the same. How they're applied across different disciplines, how they're adapted are where the novelty comes from. And I think the problem with a ChatGPT writing is that it's averaging all of these ideas into something that is similarly replicable. So you're not getting the insight from drawing from all these different disciplines and being able to create this new application to a similar space because of this averaging that these models are doing. And I think that that's inherently what the flaw is. I think the best writing, the best tweeting, the best podcasting, it's borrowing for other concepts and applying them to a new domain. So that it isn't novel still, but it's more complex and essentially like less average so that it can be useful. I don't know if that necessarily makes sense.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. There's nothing new under the sun, but you recombine things. I mean, if you look at it, like, there's nothing novel about music. Like, all the musical instruments were invented, most of the musical instruments were invented hundreds of years ago, and we're just working with the same range of frequency, the same like time signatures and stuff like that. But you can recombine those fundamental things into all kinds of creative expressions. And, you know, AI music is just not going to do quite what like a human composer that has also taken in a huge corpus, but also has that kind of like human instinct for applying. I would argue that, of course, like there's some really good AI music out there that keeps getting better and better all the time. But I genuinely believe, as somebody who does compose music from time to time and enjoys music, that like it's going to be extremely hard to compose a riff like Nile Rodgers would compose, you know, and to get that same charm. Yes, you could feed his entire corpus of every single Chic song in there and all his Sister Sledge, everything like that, and put it into a blender and try to be like a Nile Rodgers riff generator. But if you actually like compare that to what Nile Rodgers sat down and played, if you put the two together, I think that the results would be like clear. And I think that maybe that's naive. What do you think about that? Do you think that is naive?
Well, I think that you said Nile Rodgers.
Nile Rodgers.
Nile Rodgers.
Rhythm guitar player from Chic.
I think that if he was adept at prompting and was telling the model what to combine, you could probably create something that was similar. But only he knows what outside resources he's pulling from, where he's getting inspiration from, all these different things. And to me, that is where the magic happens in these things. I mean, the problem, again, with a ChatGPT writing blog content for me is that in that circumstance, if I ask it to write a LinkedIn post, it has all these emojis, it has all these like these weird things that are a stereotypical LinkedIn post. And a stereotypical LinkedIn post is not necessarily a successful LinkedIn post. And the more of these stereotypical LinkedIn posts that we get, the more diluted the content is. And so the further that I can actually get from a ChatGPT LinkedIn post, the more it will stand out in the audience's eyes because it's less uniform than the other content that's being produced. So the more AI content there is out there, the more similar the corpus of content is going to be, and the more benefit that you have of being and creating original content. That's one of the things I love about podcasting is that I would argue for a normal YouTube video of mine, someone could make or replicate it very easily. They could say all the same things. They could probably shoot better camera angles. They could make it faceless, do whatever it is, and replicate that really well. It's very hard, just as you were saying earlier, Quincy, to replicate an entire conversation. Yeah. The randomness in which it goes, the personality. If it was two robots talking and we didn't have any backstory, any lived experience, why would there be a reason to tune in to hear that conversation outside of the novelty of two robots talking, right? What makes the content interesting is the individual stories and the perspectives the humans have. At least at this point in time, unless it's completely fabricated, the AIs do not have this rich backstory of human history. I'll also say that I think really deep research that consolidates a ton of different knowledge is something that AI does not do well at this point in time. That might change. That's probably more subject to change than the podcast interviews. But to me, that corpus of knowledge or organizing a tremendous amount of knowledge into like a 4-hour episode is something I don't think AI will be doing as effectively as human in the short term. So for me, this long form content, again, you also create this relationship with the listeners that I think is very hard for an AI to do.
Yeah. Oh, well, I think that that's a great point. One other place where organic conversations come up a lot that I know you're a big advocate of attending conferences for people that are getting into the space. Can you talk about like your passion for conferences and how somebody getting into the field, like what they should optimize for in terms of maybe some specific conferences they should look at for specific types?
Yeah, I think by far the most opportunities that I've had in my career have come through other people. I mean, after interviewing, I'd say it's probably been over 100 people on the podcast because we have repeat guests and things along those lines, even though we're almost at episode 200. One of the common threads is that one or two people has made a profound impact on their individuals' careers. And so, in my opinion, one of the best ways to meet people that could have a positive impact on your career is through going to conferences, through doing coffee meetups, through doing, unfortunately, these things in person if you're a introverted person.
Yeah.
Fortunately for me is I'm quite extroverted, and that extroversion has led me to meeting a lot of people that would help either the podcast, the content, my professional life, my personal life, any of these types of things. And the most high leverage things that I've done is in collaboration or meeting other people. I will also say my best friend, she's introverted, very introverted, but she has the benefit of having an extroverted friend who introduces her to a lot of different people. So you don't necessarily have to be the extrovert yourself, but going to conferences is a great way to meet someone who's extroverted that can do all, you can outsource all of your
a super connector
too as well. Exactly.
Somebody who knows everybody. They're like, you may know these people. They're like, they just make it a point to like be curious about other people and go out and meet other people. And I aspire to one day be a super connector in terms of just knowing a lot of people in the data science world, the developer world. And it sounds like you've been able to do that as well through your podcast and through your work. Just meet a broad array of data scientists. If somebody wants to just get like a really good classic episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors, they're looking for an interview to listen to. Is there one that you'd recommend off the top of your head that you're really proud of?
Let's think here. So one more recently that I thought was really useful. I think that the job market in data science is maybe not as great as a lot of people would like right now. I did one with Nick Singh, who wrote the book, I think it's Ace the Data Science Interview. And that has a really good perspective on the landscape and what you can do to get ahead. I also did one more recently with Wes McKinney, who is the creator of the Pandas library. And that was a really informative one about his process and his experience, and a little bit of the comparison between open source and the more private nature of some of these AI models that are coming up. So I think those would be pretty interesting ones for anyone who is new to the podcast.
Awesome. Well, I am going to link to both of those episodes below. So once you finish listening to this, I hope you'll go and listen to even more Ken Jee insights as he interviews some of these thinkers and doers in the data science space. Ken, I just want to thank you again, man, for giving me so much of your busy day. I want to welcome you again to Texas. I think it's so cool that you're like a 3.5 hour drive away. And I definitely want to hang out with you, probably at some upcoming conference, and then go get a big meal with you at some point. Because yeah, I mean, I assume, like, did you eat a lot of good food when you were in Hawaii? Did you ever?
I ate a lot of good food.
Yeah,
but you know, there's only like I've had enough poke for a lifetime, and so I'm on my Tex-Mex and barbecue era, which I'm perfectly happy about. My waistline is not super happy about that, but
yeah, unfortunately, that's not as healthy as poke.
No, unfortunately not. But what can you do?
Awesome, man. Well, it's been such a pleasure talking with you. Everybody, be sure to check the show notes. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't subscribed to the freeCodeCamp podcast, and be sure to look for new interviews like this every week, coming straight from insightful people like Ken Jee. And again, seriously, check out the show notes and listen to some of Ken's interviews. There's one of me. I had terrible mic quality. I apologize for the quality of my mic. It was before I switched to like this nice dynamic microphone. But if you want to hear the many questions that Ken asked of me. Very insightful. I hope you enjoy that as well. And man, I appreciate everything you're doing for making data science more accessible for folks getting into the field. And I appreciate your, very candid. You're not sugarcoating anything. Like you go there, you talk about, the real challenges people have getting into the field, the capriciousness of the job market, which we're also experiencing in software development as a field. But I mean, the reality is, I think this field of data science, it sounds like, of doing machine learning, of doing everything that you're doing with, math and computer science, I can only imagine it continuing to grow as we become a more, can we end on that?
Yeah,
are you pretty optimistic about the future of the field?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, think about what AI needs to be successful. You need more data without a doubt. I think that there's going to be tremendous opportunities, particularly in data engineering to start. You need the infrastructure to support some of the AI advancements. And if you think about it, a lot of people are scared about, is AI going to take my role? A lot of these types of things. Who is more suited? Who is most suited to excel in a world where AI tools are prominent? Probably the people who are starting to build them, which are data scientists, machine learning engineers, and these types of people. So I personally embrace using the tools, even though I don't write it for blogging. I use them a lot to code and for other things. So, my thought is that people in the data science domain, people who are technically inclined, people who are coding, are the most prepared to start using these tools for other things. And that's an incredible opportunity, in my opinion, rather than something to necessarily be afraid of.
Awesome. Thank you again. Ken Jee,
Quincy,
everyone.
Thank you. And
Until
we gotta have you on Ken's Nearest Neighbors again. I mean, I have the little studio right here.
Dude,
so.
I want to actually come there and be an in-person episode. And I would love to interview you in person at some point as well.
Heck yeah. Would love it.
Awesome. Well, everybody, until next week, happy coding.